Welcome, everyone, to the Alleghenies Ahead podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Imhoff. We're back here in the digital grotto to talk about transportation planning. Now, I'd be willing to bet most people don't know that on every gallon of gas, they pay a 19-cent federal tax, and in Pennsylvania, 58 per gallon tax. So my guest here today, Chris Allison, is going to help lead us through how that money is collected and planned for, and how that money turns into transportation infrastructure, the roads and the bridges that we drive on every day. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Chris Allison. I work with the Cambria County Planning Commission, and I've been doing transportation planning for probably more years than I should admit. And I've been with the Planning Commission for just over 10 years now.
And your position with the Planning Commission is the Transportation Planner.
Correct.
Correct. So start us off by telling us a little bit about transportation planning and what it is you do on a daily basis.
Oh, it's a broad topic. Transportation planning is essentially, it's a process that we utilize to allocate our resources toward maintaining and building up of our transportation infrastructure. That includes all different modes of transportation. So that would include your highways, bridges, public transit, and also bicycle and pedestrian modes of transportation, and passenger rail, and so forth. Mm-hmm. So it's also a way that we coordinate the public goals and objectives. We receive public input to do the planning process, and how we coordinate that with elected officials and so forth.
Mm-hmm. So, as I mentioned, every gallon of gas has a 19-cent federal tax, and that has not been that amount has not been adjusted for inflation since 1993. And then in Pennsylvania, each state has its own state tax on top of the federal tax, and in Pennsylvania, that's 58 cents a gallon. So in Pennsylvania, we're paying 77 cents per gallon of that $2.50 or $3 or whatever it is you pay is going towards our transportation infrastructure. So Chris, when we pay that money, it goes to PennDOT, and then so how and what does PennDOT do with that money?
Well, effectively, the federal share of the money goes to the federal government, mm-hmm. and then Congress has ways that they determine how that funding is distributed throughout the states. So, in the case of Pennsylvania, it's based on how many miles of federally obligated roadway that we have in the state, as well as other factors such as population and so forth. And that's a formula-based distribution of funding. And then similarly, with the state funding, Pennsylvania has their own formula by which they use to distribute the funding to various regions throughout the state. Mm-hmm. And we are in the Southern Alleghenies Regional Planning Organization area, and also the Cambria County Metropolitan Planning Organization. So mm-hmm. the funding is allocated based on the region that we're in.
You had mentioned the MPOs and the RPOs, which are the Metropolitan Planning Organizations and the Rural Planning Organizations, which were created in the 60s mostly to bring an element of public participation into transportation planning. So can you talk about the role of the MPOs and the RPOs and their purpose?
Sure. The MPO, and I'm going to speak for Cambria County because that's who I represent, but this goes for all of the various metropolitan planning organizations.
Before you do that, so like you said before, Southern Alleghenies has 3 planning organizations. Cambria County has their own metropolitan planning organization. Altoona, Blair County has their own metropolitan planning organization, and then Huntington, Bedford, Fulton, Somerset County are part of a rural planning organization, right?
Right.
Okay.
And the function of the MPO is really to be a facilitator, whereby we're the middleman in between the public and the elected officials and PennDOT. So our role is to make sure that the public process and the planning process includes the public, and for us to facilitate the public being able to be involved in the transportation planning process. And we do that by, we have committees that are convened that consist of broad representation of different stakeholders in the local region, as well as state planning officials. And we facilitate those meetings and make sure that the planning process is inclusive of everybody.
Mm-hmm. So what happens in those meetings then? What opportunities are the public given to participate in the planning process?
Well, whenever plans are developed, there's public input that is solicited and so forth. We do surveys. We also publish all of our meeting dates and invite the public to attend the meetings. They're given a chance to provide input at the meetings, and we take their comments into consideration whenever we're prioritizing projects or selecting which projects will go on the development list for the transportation funding.
So if I'm a member of the public, or I'm a municipality or a stakeholder in the community, I can come to the MPO meeting and sit down and talk to the appointed officials about the projects that are important to me.
Yeah, that's the way it's intended to work. Absolutely.
Okay. So with that in mind, lead us through the process of how a project, a transportation project, say a bridge or a roadway improvement, goes from an idea or something that a municipality thinks would be a good idea, something that somebody presents to you or PennDOT, how that goes from the idea phase to an actual project that's implemented.
Sure. Usually, the way we like to term it is that we don't start out with a project. We start out with a problem. And the problem can be presented by a member of the public or a member of the MPO committee or a state official or pretty much anybody. And it goes through channels to us. It eventually ends up on our table. And then we would work with PennDOT and local officials to try to determine what's the best way to solve this problem. Say a problem, for example, would be, say there's excessive congestion in a certain corridor of highway or so forth, or there's a intersection that has been determined to be a safety issue, or we believe that there may be a safety problem there. So we'll look at data to try to confirm that and try to understand what's happening, and then we would move on from there to determine what the best course of action would be to correct that and what the cost would be associated with that. And then finally we would put that in with other similar projects and try to determine which projects are prioritized to be done before the other projects.
Mm-hmm. So if somebody comes in with a request or an idea, that idea is going to be evaluated based on data or other criteria to determine whether, if indeed it is a good idea, and if it is, where it ranks amongst presumably the other good ideas on the list.
That's true. That's pretty much how it's meant to work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So locally in Cambria County or regionally throughout the Southern Alleghenies region, what are some of the local goals and priorities when it comes to transportation planning?
Well, in recent years, the priorities have shifted from more of a build mentality to more of a maintain the current system type of mentality. And a lot of these goals and objectives, as I mentioned previously, are coming from the federal side of things, where they're prioritizing, okay, we have infrastructure that is built out and is starting to deteriorate at a rate faster than we've been able to maintain it. So the main focus of priority has been to be rebuilding infrastructure where necessary and maintaining it as best as possible, and looking at the full life cycle of, say, a bridge or a highway or a bus or a trail or whatever type of transportation facility that we're talking about, and try to make the best allocation of resources to maintain what we have. In addition to that, as far as new projects go, there's been a big focus lately, especially in our region, on looking at other modes of transportation besides just highways. There's been an increase in focus on trail development, bicycle pedestrian facilities, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. So how much money comes into, let's say, Cambria County, and the MPO in Cambria County? How much funding are we talking about on, say, an annual basis?
We have been getting historically around $16 to $18 million per year for all of our transportation projects, for highways and bridges. There's an additional amount that the Cambria County Transit Authority gets to do their facilities improvements and so forth. Mm-hmm. But as far as highways and bridges and trail projects, it's in the order of $16 to $18 million annually, which doesn't go very far when you start to look at all of the amount of roadways that we have to maintain and the amount of bridges that we have to maintain and reconstruct and so forth.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. $16 to $18 million. It sounds like a lot of money, but when you're talking about paving roads, that goes pretty quick, right?
Yeah, and I think at last estimate, it's around $1 million a mile to pave a road.
Mm-hmm. So most of that funding, by your estimation, goes into maintenance of existing roadways and highways, bridges.
Yes.
Okay. So a part of the process, a part of the transportation planning process is what's called the long-range transportation plan. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we wanted to touch on that a little bit as well, because there's forecasting that goes on. We don't, these projects take a lot of time to plan and then fund and then execute. So the goal of the long-range transportation plan, as I understand it, is to develop goals and priorities throughout the county so that we can help PennDOT and our transportation planning partners guide those investments, right?
Correct. So the main function of the long-range transportation plan is to provide for a framework, a decision-making framework, and an overall strategy and policy statement for how we decide to prioritize projects and how we develop a project from a problem. What are our processes that we use, and so forth.
Okay. So that happens, as I understand, every 4 years.
Yes.
And we're currently going through the process here in Cambria County right now to update that plan.
Yes, we are.
Okay. So, so what are you working on right now on that 4-year forecast?
As far as the development of the plan?
Yeah, the process itself. How does the process of the plan unfold, and what type of input are you looking for to make a successful plan?
Yeah, absolutely. We convened a project steering committee, and we have met a couple months ago to sort of discuss the scope of the project and so forth. We're looking at extending the current plan horizon out another 4 years, and we are currently developing some strategies to do some outreach to the public, which this podcast would be one of those strategies. And we're going to be putting out a survey here shortly that's going to be online that we would really like to get as much input through that as possible. Mm-hmm. And we're also going to be scheduling some in-person public meetings in a couple different areas of the county in order to try to get some in-person input from the public.
What's the type of input that you're looking for? What's the most valuable input?
I would say what we would like to know is what is what is your vision of what the transportation system in the county should look like? Where should we be prioritizing our funding investments? What type of decisions should we be making from that standpoint? And certainly, if there are any areas of concern from a problem standpoint, if there's a problem intersection or a problem stretch of roadway, we can't know everything that's happening in the whole system at all times. So to have that local knowledge, to have someone who drives that road every day, they might notice something that we wouldn't have ever picked up on. So that type of input is extremely valuable for us when we're developing the plan.
Now, you're getting input from municipalities, or who do you typically hear from during this process?
We would like to hear from as many people as possible, as many diverse backgrounds as we can. Typically, we do hear mostly from what I would call stakeholders, public officials, municipal officials especially. They tend to be very in tune with what's happening on the roadways and so forth, and what their local constituency, what their priorities are.
Yeah, it seems kind of in everyday life, there's no shortage of critics who seem to have their own ideas of what should be done and how to fix problems. So I would think that you'd hear from a lot of different folks who have their own ideas of what might work best when it comes to transportation.
Yeah, typically we usually don't get that input until we're down to the project level, where we've already identified an area where we want to do a project, and then we start having public meetings specifically related to that problem area. Then people tend to be a little bit more engaged at that point. But what we would like to do is to have people more engaged earlier than that, so that we can identify, because the sooner that we can identify local issues or concerns in the planning process, the more smoothly the whole thing operates.
So most of that 16 to 18 million is going to be reinvested into our existing local roadway network. But you mentioned kind of the emerging importance of recreation and our bike and our trail and our pedestrian network. And, that was something that was a high priority in the Alleghenies Ahead process throughout the region and also in Cambria County. And as projects have begun to be implemented, how do those modes of transportation fit in the planning process? Well,
We do have representatives on the MPO from the bicycling and the pedestrian community. And a lot of times those projects are they don't have specific funding allocated to them in our funding programs. However, we've been able to fund them traditionally with sort of non-traditional funding programs, such as the Transportation Alternatives Program that the state runs, that is specifically designed to fund those type of projects. Another way that those projects have been able to be done is through the cooperation with Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. And they've been good, especially recently. They've initiated a program called PennDOT Connects, where they try to reach out to municipal officials early in the development process of a particular project and ask them if there are pedestrian facilities that could be included in the project. Now, the stipulation to that is once PennDOT will try to incorporate those improvements with their other project, as long as the municipal officials agree to take over the maintenance after the construction is completed. So that's been a mechanism for getting a lot of those projects completed. There's going to be a project in Johnstown that is a very good example of that, across from the Point Stadium, where there was a rock slide and PennDOT had to close the lane of traffic. They're going to clean the area up a little bit, but they're going to keep it to one lane of traffic because they realize that there's plenty of capacity on the road with just one lane, and the road is operating well within its design capacity, and they don't need to open the second lane back up. So that provided an opportunity to put a trail connection in there to the James Wolfe Trail, which is on the hillside where the inclined plane is located. So that's a good example of how the PennDOT Connects process has been able to spur some bicycle and pedestrian projects.
And that's part of kind of the larger effort in Johnstown. I'm aware of that with the urban connectivity plan, they're calling it, to bring more trails to the Johnstown area and build on the trails that are already there. Again, to enhance the recreation part of it, to take advantage of the natural resources and mountains and rivers that are so abundant in the region.
That's right. I mean, you mentioned the comprehensive plan placed high priority on recreation and trail development and so forth. And we've been finding that with the last time we updated our long-range plan 4 years ago, we received a lot of input where people were, that was important to a lot of people in the region. So we've been trying to develop those assets as much as possible through our transportation planning process.
Mm-hmm. And if people feel that those types of facilities are important, they can comment on that during the long-range transportation planning process through the survey or at a public meeting.
Absolutely, we would encourage that.
Okay, great. Walk us through, are there, I know we were talking a little bit about the Guystown Roundabout in Johnstown as kind of a higher profile project. And tell our listeners a little bit about, a project they may know about in terms of how it went from, where it is now. If you're familiar with the Guystown intersection in Johnstown, well, in Guystown Borough, but in the Johnstown region, it's a very confusing intersection. I still get confused when I drive through there. And the plan now is to replace the confusing intersection and bridge with a roundabout, which is a pretty innovative project and something new for our region. I think it's the first roundabout in Cambria County. So
it's the first one in Cambria County. It's the first one in the 6-county PennDOT District 9 region.
And that matches up with the Southern Alleghenies counties, right? Yeah.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that project actually started out as a bridge replacement project. Mm-hmm. There's a bridge that carries Scalp Avenue over Belmont Street in Guystown. And there are some various ramps associated with making sure that those two roads that traffic from either of those two roads can get from one to the other. And once PennDOT started looking at the project, they had an innovative engineering firm that stepped forward and said, well, what if we just eliminate this bridge? Maybe we can just make this an intersection and eliminate all of these various ramps and so forth that are seemingly confusing and take up a lot of space and cause extra infrastructure to have to be maintained. Just eliminating a bridge will save a huge amount of future funding in the maintenance and the overall life cycle cost of a facility like that. A bridge is extremely expensive to build and to maintain over its life cycle. So they started looking at alternatives for an intersection there. And it turned out that with the way that the space is set up there and the way that the roads intersect with each other, and the amount of traffic and the speeds of the traffic going through there, their data analysis showed that a roundabout is the most efficient way and the safest way of reconfiguring that intersection. So from that point, they moved toward investigating that a little bit further. They did public outreach. They've had several rounds of public outreach to try to explain, because it's a new concept, and there aren't, surprisingly enough, not everybody in the public that's aware of the project is in favor of it. A lot of people seem to think that roundabouts are confusing, and that's understandable. It's something new that not a lot of people are familiar with. And as we just noted, we don't have any around here that people would be used to driving in, on, or through. But if you really look at the information, the roundabout it sucks up traffic. It just is such an efficient way of moving traffic through an intersection. And it also statistically does improve safety. Essentially what it means is everybody going through there will have to slow down, but nobody will have to stop to get through the intersection. So it makes things a lot more efficient. It's also going to lead to, I think, some aesthetic improvements in the Guystown area. As part of that project, PennDOT worked with Guystown Borough, and Guystown Borough was very proactive and in favor of having some pedestrian facilities installed along with the roundabout. And that goes well together too, because the roundabout is safer for pedestrians and as well as vehicles. So they're going to be adding sidewalks and so forth throughout the project. So that's a pretty good example of how a major project can come about through planning and through public involvement and working with the local officials and just working with the data to make sure that the solution to the problem is the right project for that particular situation.
How long did that take, the roundabout? I mean, when from first being talked about as kind of an idea, identified that there was a problem there and that the bridge needed to be fixed, and there's some congestion to where it is now, where it's basically a go, right?
I believe it's been at least 2 years since the first meeting that I attended. But the bridge project would have been on the Transportation Improvement Program for a few years, even probably before that, before they started doing preliminary engineering on it. So these projects do take a long time to develop. It's not that this just happened overnight and they decided to plop down a roundabout in the middle of Johnstown.
And it sounds like there were a lot of opportunity for public involvement and for the public, pro or con, to provide their opinions and comments about the project.
Yeah, I believe there was, absolutely.
Were there business owners affected or anybody else? I mean,
yeah, that's another good point. Whenever a project like this happens, PennDOT does reach out to any affected homeowner or property owner or business owner in the area, and they did work as closely as possible with. There's a supermarket there. They worked very closely with the owners of that, and there's a office building right in the middle of that whole intersection area. And as far as I know, the last I heard, the only negative effect to a business would have been to the Meadows property, and it was just a small section of their little putt-putt golf course that they were going to need to cut out, I guess, in order to put the road in. Now that might have changed since I last talked to the PennDOT program manager.
Okay. So getting back to the long-range transportation plan process that's going on now, how is that going to unfold over the next few months?
So our plan is to have the long-range transportation plan draft available for review in the spring. So we're talking about the April or May timeframe. And then we would like to be able to have it approved in June. So in the next few weeks, we're going to be really heavily looking for public input so that we can do some analysis of what input we get. And then we're going to go back and look at the current plan and see where things need to be adjusted and so forth. Then the plan does include a project list that we're also developing. And then along with that, there's a 4-year project list, which is essentially the first 4 years of projects, and we update that every 2 years. So we'll be updating that project list in conjunction with the long-range plan update.
So the goals and priorities along with the proposed projects, those are all published in a listing that if I'm interested, I'm a member of the public or I'm a municipality or stakeholder, I can take a look at that as you're going through the process and provide
Absolutely.
comments.
Yeah, we will provide a copy of the draft for public review. We normally will post it on the Planning Commission website. We'll try to promote it as much as possible, and we also distribute paper copies to a couple locations throughout the county. We usually have one at the courthouse. There's one at our office, and there's one at the library in Johnstown, and one at the Transit Authority office. So if anybody is internet challenged or doesn't have the technology to view it online, there are hard copies available too, and our contact information is widely available if anyone wants to reach out to us.
And the Metropolitan Planning Organization meetings where this is discussed and ultimately approved, those are all public meetings that the public can attend as well, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Are there any other ways the public can get involved, or ways for people to provide input that's helpful to you during this process?
We're always looking for input. I would encourage everybody to check out our Facebook page, take a look at the Planning Commission website. We have all of the meeting minutes from our previous MPO meetings are out there, and we have a schedule of upcoming meetings and so forth. My contact information is out there. I'm happy to talk with anybody at any time about any issues that they have in their community, and go from there.
Okay, great. Well, think about that next time you're pumping your gas and paying your federal and state gas taxes. Chris, it's been great having you on.
Thank you.
And we'll be publicizing through our website the ways that people can get involved with the long-range transportation process and also the MPO. So if you'd like to review the plan and see what the priorities are for Cambria County, you can get that information. And I should add, this process also exists in Blair County and the other 4 Southern Alleghenies counties as well. So if you're in one of those counties, you can keep an eye out there too. So again, Chris, appreciate the time.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the Alleghenies Ahead podcast.